Hey everyone, welcome back. So, porn and masturbation are not typically topics that are usually brought up in the health and wellness field, but there's mounting evidence both from ancient traditions such as Taoism and traditional Chinese medicine, as well as more recent studies that point to a pretty jarring conclusion that porn and masturbation is ruining our health, specifically our dopamine pathways, as well as our quote unquote life force, or as we call it today, our vitality or just plain old chronic fatigue. And so today on our show, we have Tyson Adams, who is a transformational coach, IFS practitioner, psychedelic guide, and so much more. I've had the pleasure of, being in relationship with him, but also in other groups. And specifically, what is unique about him is that he exclusively focuses on this field called sexual transmutation. And we're going to go into what exactly that is and how to invite more of that into your life, depending on what degree you'd like to invite that in. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Tyson to go ahead and introduce himself and kick us off on our conversation today on sexual transmutation and how to reframe your relationship with porn and masturbation.
Wow. Thank you, David. That was quite the introduction. I really appreciate it. That was great. All right. So where to begin? Shall we begin with sex transmutation, or do you want to begin with
I'd like to actually
pornography?
just take a few steps back and just
Okay.
because this is a really interesting area of focus or expertise. And so I think it'd be very interesting to understand how you found yourself guiding men into reframing their relationship with porn and masturbation, how this kind of specialty found its way into your life. And you obviously have your own journey with it. So I think it'd be great to touch on that first.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I was exposed to pornography very early on. It was around 9 years old. Like many boys my age, we often found magazines. I found a Playboy magazine. It was a Vanna White Playboy. So I still remember that because my mother loved Wheel of Fortune. And once I saw that and it popped open, that was the only thing I could focus on every day after school. I'd go up there, go and find there's a board over this hole in the ground and open it up, and I would go through all the porn. And my friends and I would go up there, and that was really this thing that just gripped me. And then one day they were just gone, and we ended up moving homes. And so then I actually I lived in Ephrata, Washington, which is up in Washington State, and we were the first town in all of America to get high-speed fiber wire put underneath the ground. And so I went from
No idea.
literally no internet, so just porn magazines, to high-speed internet porn. And shortly thereafter,
So
I found
what year was this more or less? So because
would have
I had my
been,
own, I'm
yeah,
like, had my own frame of like how my life changed with fiber optic internet. So like, yeah, around what year was this exactly?
yeah. So I was born in 84, so that would have been 94, about 96,
Okay.
96-ish,
Yeah.
97 maybe. Yeah. And so there was a program called Kazaa, which was kind of like Napster, but it
Mhm.
was the ability to download internet pornography. And back then there were no teaser images or thumbnails about what you were downloading. There was just a list of, things. And so I would just click download on 4 or 5 of them, and they would just take a couple hours, and then boom, they were there. And when I went through my trauma training and my trauma informed certificate, when I look back on that time in my life, I was able to see very clearly that trauma is not what happened to me. It's not what happens. It's not the event. It's the leftover energy in my system when something happened too much, too fast, or too soon. Too much, too fast, and too soon.
Mhm.
And then there was also the neglect piece, which was that my parents didn't attune to me in that process to say, hey, what's going on here? And so
Yeah.
the reason why I bring that up is when I say too much, too fast, too soon, any type of pornography for a 12-year-old or 11-year-old is going to be too much, but especially the stuff that was on the internet. Back then, there would be all kinds of wild stuff and things that were very inappropriate, whether it was bestiality type pornography or whether it was violent porn. And
Mhm.
so I was bringing all of this energy into my system unknowingly, and that was impacting my way of relating and my way of being in relationship with the feminine, because I had seen pornography before I'd ever even had a kiss or even had a romantic partner. So
Yeah, and I think that's a
yeah,
very, I think that actually is the case for most men, really. And now, especially nowadays, they're encountering pornography way before they have any real life intimacy. I
Hmm.
really liked your definition of trauma, and I'd almost be think we'd be remiss if you didn't just repeat it. Like, can you just say that definition of trauma one more time? I think it was just really incredible and succinct.
Yeah. So trauma is not what happened to you. It's not the event. It's the energy and the story that is stored in the body when something happens too much, too fast, too soon, or not enough over a long period of time. So not enough over a long period of time is the neglect piece, right? So a child left to cry it out, that also is trauma over time. So when I work and I think about trauma, I'm thinking about it through the lens of the energy in the body and then the story that we carry around that event and or what we made it mean about ourselves. And so when I'm working with trauma, especially when I'm doing body work, I do sort of an IFS approach to it where I'm unwinding the tissues which carry the parts, which then allow for the person to release that and move forward in their life.
Awesome. And so thanks for sharing that, kind of how porn entered in your life and was a huge part of your own healing. We just want to get a quick encapsulation of what your coaching practice looks like today, some of the modalities that you use before we kind of continue the conversation, because I want to make sure we get a full introduction to you and your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I focus on sexual mastery, but the word mastery implies a lot of things to a lot of different people,
Hmm.
and it can be taken incorrectly. But for me, when I say sexual mastery, I mean the ability to move from sex and masturbation as a means to feel better, right? So when we're
Hmm.
using it to feel better when we're sad or sick or bored or angry or anything where we don't want to feel, and we're moving into a different way of relating to it where sex and masturbation is a means to better feel. So instead of feel better, we're moving into better feel. So that transition is unique for each man. And so when I work with men one on one modality that I do is one on one coaching. So I work with men for 12 weeks. And a lot of the men that come to me are coming to me for different types of challenges, whether that's a porn addiction, sometimes sexual dysfunctions as it relates to erectile dysfunction or performance anxiety or premature ejaculation. So anything within that realm. It
Okay.
could also just be that they have sometimes it's religious sexual stuff, right? Things that there's a deep amount of shame there that they want to work through. So it kind of depends upon the individual. And then I also work with couples. And when I work with couples, I use what's called intimacy from the inside out, which is a type of IFS, but it's for couples. And a lot
Okay.
of the couples that are coming to me with intimacy issues, whether that is porn has infiltrated the relationship or there's been infidelity in the relationship or something of that nature. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, so those are kind of the one-on-one stuff, and then I do psychedelic facilitation. I do group men's work where we do experiential. I have three other men that I work with, so we have a team of four that hold in men's intensives,
Mm.
and then I also do bioelectric body work. And so bioelectric body work is it's used with a TENS unit, which a TENS unit's like a stim machine. If you've ever had physical
Yeah.
therapy,
Yeah. For sure.
yeah. So this particular machine, though, when you put it on, the two paddles go onto the client who's on the table, the other paddles go onto the ground. And then when I put my foot on it, the electricity moves through my feet, through my body, and into my hands. So as I'm touching the client, it's actually creating sort of like an avatar link up where you're literally connected to that individual. So that
Nice.
is sort of the deepest work that I do with people. I do that with psilocybin and or MDMA, or a combination, and sometimes sober as well. And that's often very deep grief work. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of tears, a lot of sweats and shakes that come out. But usually when I do that type of work, it's building a playlist, making it really kind of having a trajectory where you're coming in sort of smoothly and then you're kind of coming off, at the end. So it's a deep, deep trauma healing work and I love it, but it's also something that is pretty intense, for the people that go through that. You have to be ready to do the deep work. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I can imagine it's intense for you holding that container as well. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And so that's a very broad, diverse toolkit. One thing I really have always enjoyed about you throughout our relationship, just on a side note, is that you give yourself a lot of permission. Like many people would say, like, "Oh, I'm not ready for do this or not ready to incorporate that." So that's just something I really admire in you as a practitioner. I think that's
Mm.
amazing that you're really committed to helping people at whatever cost. Like, doesn't really matter which modality. So just to kind of kick things off further, I want to start with a definition of sexual transmutation. That's a term that you and I have discussed. I've seen it in your work on social media. I personally encountered this term through Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich. I think it's chapter 11 or something like that. It's kind of hidden in that book. But that was my first introduction maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I was reframing my own relationship with pornography. But for our purposes, or for your purposes, how do you define sexual mastery or transmutation?
Yeah. Yeah. The Mystery of Sex Transmutation, chapter 11. Yeah. That was where I first came across that term as well. And I gobbled up that chapter. And then I thought to myself, great, Napoleon, you pointed at the trailhead, but where's the map? There's
Totally.
legitimately no description of how to do this or what it is. It's just this, and I get it. It's the 1930s, and but it is the number one money mindset book in the world, and there's a reason for that. And I do believe it is that particular chapter. So when I came across that term, that's really what took me into the Taoist lineages and really down that path of understanding what is sexual alchemy, what is semen retention, what is the root of the body, what is the perineum and that muscle there between your balls and your anus, what is that region, and what is it all about, and what is the relationship between sexuality and money, and or the relationship between sexuality and the ability to manifest creative, like in a creative way. And that obviously could be to make money, but that could also be into art, into music, into meditation. It could be into many different things. So as I kind of went down that path, which was pretty deep, I went deep into it. I started to want to understand the science of it. What is the actual scientific reality? Because when you look at the Taoist arts, they basically talk about working with the root of the body, and that our actual semen transmutes, meaning that there's, some of these Taoist texts, they talk about a little tiny hole in the bottom of your spine where the semen's actually being transmuted from one form of energy into another form of energy, and then trickling up your spine and into your brain, unlocking different levels of consciousness, and then bringing that energy back down to the front in the lower dantian area between the belly button and the pubic hair.
Mm.
So as I started to understand that when you look at these different lineages, it was very esoteric to me, and it was very kind of out there. But then
For
when you
sure.
look at Qigong versus Nigong, and understanding that, like, if Qigong is sort of that external movement and conscious awareness versus Nigong is sort of the maybe the internal energies that flow through the system, I started
Mm.
to get curious about, well, what is really going on inside of my system without my awareness or without my direction? And in the process of doing psychedelic work, which was really, I was kind of blending what is sex transmutation and what is this psychedelic stuff. I would put on an eye mask, put on music, go into these sort of deep portals, and I began working with the root of my body. And as I worked with the root of my body, I started to understand this esoteric idea by working with it. And as I started squeezing it and developing that muscle group, I started to feel things that were unique. My nervous system would shift, it would change. Sometimes in the beginning, there was a lot of anger in the beginning, and a lot of like pornography and just gunk that needed to
Mm.
be moved. But once I started to move that stuff out, I started to realize, like, oh, wow, I can actually send this energy into any spot of my body. I could send it to an organ. I could send it up the spine, up the front channel, the back channel, the left channel, right channel, the center column. There's different ways. And I don't mean this imaginally. I mean, like, you can actually feel the energy moving in your own system in a
Yeah.
way that is like tangible and real. So then I had this idea, because I was doing neurofeedback, and
Sure.
neurofeedback is amazing. They put the brain scan on, the little things on your electrodes on your head.
Yeah. The nodes. Yeah.
Yeah, the nodes, and then hooking it up to the computer. And I had this theory, which was, I wonder what's going on with my brain, because when I would squeeze my perineum and draw the energy up my spine, I could feel something happening in my mind, but I didn't know what it was. I couldn't understand it. It was not tangible yet, scientifically speaking. So I got my friend, we got myself all hooked up, and we began doing these experiments where I would either do squeezes, boom, 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 or just squeeze, hold. And then I would just do regular, just microcosmic orbit, where there was no actual perineum like squeezes. And basically, anytime you do these conscious transmutation processes in terms of what the brain's actually doing, you can see that it changes and shifts consciousness on some level. And so what was really exciting was that gamma was opening up in the brain. And when you look at the brainwave gamma, and you look at people that have meditated for 30 years, there's a skill there. There's something that is built in their nervous systems. And so to me, what I see is, wow, we actually have at the root of our body this capacity. If we learn how to work with that muscle in the perineum region, we have the ability to actually open up gamma in the brain, and gamma opens up.
So just for those that don't entirely know, where's the perineum located? So some
Yeah,
people may
so
not have a good command of anatomy.
absolutely. So there's 3 points. One that's kind of underneath the testicles, like underneath the balls, and then there's one that's kind of in between that area, between the balls
Okay.
and the anus, and then there's also the anus. So there's actually 3 different regions that you can squeeze, and you can do them in
Oh, okay.
succession, or you can do it all as a single group, depending upon your level of awareness and your level of skill.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
That's really helpful.
yeah.
Nice. Nice. Okay.
And let me just also say, it's not
Yeah.
just about the squeezing, it's also about the releasing. So pushing out the perineum, because if we just do a bunch of squeezes, we can create a lot of internal heat. And sometimes
Mm.
we need to be able to release that energy too. And so you got to be able to push it both ways. It's almost like pushing out a poop. It kind of feels a little weird, but when you start to work with that, you can enter these brainwave states that allow for you to do things. And then I'll say one last thing, because I think this is also critical. When I went through
Yep.
my trauma training, they spoke about the vagus nerve, right? The vagus nerve running from the tailbone up the spine into the brain, into the face, and basically attaches to all your major organs. Well, the pudendal nerve, which runs in the inside of the perineum, has 2 little spots on both sides, and the pudendal nerve actually connects into the vagus. And so when you're actually squeezing the perineum, electrically speaking, you're actually activating the vagus. The vagus is firing, and it's either, if you're squeezing it a lot or hard, you're putting yourself into a sympathetic charge. But if you're squeezing and holding it, you can actually downregulate yourself into parasympathetic. So
Mm.
when I'm tethering with you and I'm throwing the ball back and forth, when you're speaking, I squeeze the perineum and hold it so that I can receive your words through my whole body and into my system. And then when I speak, I release it and I just allow it to flow. So that's kind of the way that I work with my nervous system.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And we definitely want to include any resources or diagrams for that because there was a lot there. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, we'll definitely unpack more of that. So just kind of turning things more at almost on a macro level. So what exactly is wrong with porn and masturbation, just on a very base level? And the reason I ask this question is because this is something I've brought up, when I was coming off of pornography maybe 6 years ago. I brought this up with groups of friends, and many of them who maybe didn't have troubled relationships with porn, or they didn't think they had troubled relationship with their sexuality or pornography, actually pushed back a little bit. They're like, "Hey, what's wrong with that? Like, that's too extreme. Like, no, like, you're just becoming a monk. Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
this nonsense?" So, I mean, I have a perspective on this, but I'd be curious on your perspective of what is this doing to men on a collective and on an energetic level, as well as to the, to the females as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to say one thing real quick, because I think it's an important thing to give a big picture about this.
Sure.
So I recently had this question in my mind: do we actually have a collective problem with pornography as men? And so I went to an SEO website and I began to look at the top 30 websites in America. And 5 of those websites are pornography. And when I looked at the actual amount of visitors, it's 6.5 billion visitors a month. And so in my head, I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of energy going into this porn thing. So then I started to think about it from the perspective of, well, if 6.35 or whatever it was, 6.5, well, I think it was 6.35 is what it was, a billion visitors, what is the amount that are actually ejaculating? Because not everybody that comes to watch porn is going to ejaculate every time. So I thought, well, maybe like 5 billion of those people, 5 billion, 5 billion visits, 5 billion ejaculations. So then I thought, okay, well, what is the amount of ejaculation that comes out of a man? Well, it's about a spoonful, right? So that's about what it is. And when you look at a spoonful in comparison to 5 billion, ejaculations, that is the equivalent of one Olympic-sized pool of ejaculation every single day. That's basically just going into nothing, right? Meaning that's just the top 5 websites, in America. So there's obviously thousands of porn websites. And so when I think about it from that perspective, I would say like, wow, we have a lot of energy going into nothing. Now, in addition to that, I would say when you look at the actual Taoist texts, they often say that one drop of semen is the equivalent of 30 drops of blood in terms of energy, meaning that it's very, very nutrient rich and potent. To answer your question, like, why is it wrong? I don't think it's wrong. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong or shameful or sinful or anything like that. But there is an actual physiological issue to this, right? You're in a health coaching perspective, in a health coaching position, and you often talk about burnout to people. But here's the interesting thing. Our seminal fluid and our semen has vitamins, minerals, proteins, and also amino acids, and it's quite a lot. And so when that is going out faster than our body can regenerate it, then what happens? Well, we're an enclosed system, and it's got to do this automatic or this autonomic function. So it's going to pull the energy from our organs, from our bones, from our tissues, from our skin, from our hypothalamus, because that's actually the part of the brain that actually reproduces our seminal fluid. And it's pulling on that energy. And so we got to in order to make more seminal fluid, we have to pull that energy from some other place. So when our brain is working on overdrive, and mind you, the hypothalamus, you know this better than I even do, but the hypothalamus regulates mood and sleep and temperature and hunger and thirst and a number of things. So if this thing is working on overdrive, well, then we're dysregulated. And then when we're dysregulated and we're lethargic, well, then what do we do as men? Well, then we reach for other things to lift us up. So then we go onto the Adderall, we go into the caffeine, we go into the sugar, the Netflix, and so on and so forth. And this has become an issue where our sexual energy going out too quickly will end up impacting the other things that we consume. And if we consume those other things, then obviously then we're not in a good health spot, right? So that's the logical reason to get on board for being a steward of your sexual energy and not watching pornography too often.
Yeah. Totally. No, thanks for sharing that. And I think you've mentioned a couple times the metaphor of like each ejaculation is equivalent to X number of steaks or eggs, basically like implying like zinc and iron and, you know, the magnesium. What was that exactly, if you remember that off the top of my head? Because I found that to be a very powerful metaphor. It was really easy to understand.
Yeah, it's this Stephen Chang. He was a Taoist sort of master, but he was also a Western medical doctor.
Sure.
He said it was 2 pieces of New York steak, 10 eggs, 6 oranges, and 2 lemons of vital nutrients, minerals, lipids, fats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, when I did some research into this particular guy, he did live, he did exist, but how he came to those conclusions in and around that science is not really available. So I would like to find somebody who would be willing to work with me on a scientific level to really understand what is actually in a tablespoon of semen. Like, what really is it? Because it's hard to verify, because that guy died a long time ago. And so it's just hard to know. But I just want to say that there is, you know, you don't have to do much other than just feel into it. When you have, some men don't have lethargy after, but I definitely did. Right. And what I will say around this is all you have to do is an experiment with yourself, because I was addicted to porn for 20 years and I had normalized running my battery at basically a quarter tank. And then when I did 30 days of no masturbation, all of a sudden my energy came way back up and my productivity in life came way back up, my energy, my mood. And then I realized, oh, the only real way to understand that I ran my battery so low would be to actually do semen retention for 30 days to allow your energies and your energy to come back up. It's a full 90 days for full spermatogenesis, meaning for your sperm to reach full maturation. So anywhere from 30 to 90 would be ideal, but you will immediately feel it when you get to that point. Now, there's a flat line though, when men are coming off porn and masturbation, where for a couple of weeks, you don't have any sexual drive. Often men feel like almost asexual, and that's scary to them. It's like, oh my gosh, where did it go? What's wrong with me? And so it's important to just let men know that that's normal, that's natural, and there's a path through it.
Cool. Thanks for all of that. I would be curious, because we're talking about both porn and masturbation. Is there a difference energetically based on what you've experienced personally, as well as with your clients, masturbating with porn versus without porn? So in other words, like kind of self-pleasure with no stimulation versus engaging in pornography. Is there any notable difference there? And I'm not talking about like ultra conscious self-pleasuring, just purely like masturbation without porn versus with porn.
And meaning the differences in what capacity?
In lethargy, in kind of just, you talked about like running at a quarter capacity. So in other words, does adding porn to the mix worsen matters. So in
Hmm.
terms of your mood, stability, regeneration, all of that.
Yeah. So I don't have any science to speak to this other than to compare people that just masturbate versus people that make love when they ejaculate. And when you make love, there's oxytocin and vasopressin and pair bonding chemicals that are released that are generative versus when we just masturbate and there's nobody there. It kind of has like an open loop. You don't get all of those feel good stuff. But you're
Mhm.
actually asking a question between porn versus just no porn. And I would say, I don't know what the research would be on that, but my own subjective experience with that is that I like this quote. One of my mentors, Jamie Wheel, he says, it's never about the thing. It's always about your relationship with the thing. And so in
Mhm.
this case, it's not about the porn. It's always about your relationship with the porn. So I
Sure.
would say for some people, if they're connecting to the porn to help them better feel, then I would say that they might be getting something of value out of it. Whereas for other people, they're using it to check out. They're using pornography as an avoidance tactic, right? So in other words, you might just get your ejaculation and have it, but you've avoided the thing that you need to do, whether that's wash the
Sure.
dishes or whether that's have a hard conversation or whatever it might be. So now you've actually compounded the experience. When you choose to masturbate without pornography, you're using an imaginal space often. Ideally, when I work with men one-on-one, we're moving beyond even the imaginal and moving just into the felt sense, which is, can you
Mhm.
bring yourself to ejaculation without even thinking about anything sexual? So as you're making that transition from porn to imaginal to obviously don't need anything,
Yeah.
there's a lot of different qualities that are different in how you feel when you're done. But the biggest sense that I've noticed is that most of the time when we're watching porn, it's like secrecy, silence, and shame. It's just like, and we're done with our experience. Then we shut the computer and go on with our day. When we spend the time to actually masturbate and connect to ourselves at the end of the experience, often a, a little bit better, we allow ourselves to stay in the moment for a second and
Mhm.
allowing ourselves to have that pleasure because it's ours. We're both creating it and we're receiving it is more generative than just shutting the computer and moving on with your experience
Yeah,
or with your
I
day.
hear that. It's almost like a self aftercare.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of leads into the next thing I had in mind, which was what are some signs that you have an unhealthy relationship with porn and masturbation? So, especially a lot of guys that are sort of on the fence, like it doesn't seem to be like a full blown, like quote unquote addiction that's disrupting their lives. But based on your clients, like what are some telltale signs that they might benefit from this or that there is sort of a dysfunction here that maybe they aren't aware of?
Mm-hmm. Um, so we have men that are in relationship and then we have men that are not in relationship. And so
Sure.
those are different realities for each man. But here's what I would say. It's not, I said this earlier, but I want to repeat it because I think it's critical. My position is that I'm not anti-porn. You know, it's not wrong or bad or immoral or sinful to use porn to feel better. But here's the thing. If we're using ourself, well, first off, let me back up. The porn industry has commercialized our life force, meaning that if they can get you to their website masturbating to this porn, then they can feed you ads. And if they can feed you ads, then they can make money. So effectively, they're using us as a means to an end. And that means to an end is for them to profit. And they don't care who you are, how old you are, what you got, what your goals and dreams are, what you need to do for the day. They don't care about that. Like all they care about is that you're logging in and that you're masturbating so that they can continue to make money. So part of it is understanding that you're being used as a means to an end, but you're also opting into that experience. You're opting into it by the mere nature of just showing up and actually opening up your computer or your phone. And so what you have to understand is that not all parasites are bad, but porn is a parasite, and it's a parasite that we're opting into experiencing. Now, why that's important is that the porn industry is using us as a means to an end, but the way that that programs us, and this is more of like parts work or shadow work, is
Yeah.
that we then are now objectifying our own bodies unconsciously, meaning that we're using our own penis and our own sexuality to feel better. So if we're sad or sick or bored or angry or numb or feeling anything we don't want to feel, we get triggered as an adult. We go back to the way that we used to do it as a boy, right? When we were a
Mm.
boy, maybe we were a pimply kid, or maybe we got bullied, or maybe somebody passed away, or maybe we had to move towns. When we found porn and masturbation, we started doing that because, I mean, it works. It makes us feel better.
Sure.
So now here we are all grown up, but we're not able to regenerate that life force as quickly because now we're much older. We're not like a young, spry little teenager running around. So what's important here is that if you're thinking about, well, do I have a problem with this? You have to consider the fact that if you're using and abusing yourself, meaning that you are unconsciously using porn and masturbation to feel better, where are you also doing that in other situations in your life? Like, are you actually doing that with your partner, with the way in which you're showing up in business, in the natural world, those types of things? And so this really takes me to kind of the core teaching that I teach around this, which is it's a mythopoetic map. It's not a truth, but it's a map for men to try on. And the map is basically that the way that a man treats his penis is how he treats everyone and everything in the world. So what I mean by that is if you're using and abusing this, meaning you're using your penis to feel better, where does that show up in the way in which you treat other people? And so that's just basically the curiosity that I would encourage men to consider is, how does this impact you without your awareness or your knowledge?
Yeah, no, that's very, very helpful. And yeah, and it is, I like the mythopoetic element in particular, because I think a lot of times we get caught up in like studies and empiricism rather
Mm-hmm.
than being very real with our lived experience,
Yeah.
kind of pointing to something outside of ourselves. Earlier, you did mention two buckets of people. You were talking about men that were not in relationship and those
Mm-hmm.
that are in relationship, and they, like you said, they have their own unique challenges. I do feel I'd be curious on how you help those that are in relationship acknowledge, let's say with their partner, that porn has infiltrated the relationship and being honest in a way that isn't shameful. Or just curious on like how you would help those relational dynamics, or within
Mm-hmm.
like with porn and within a relationship, because I do think it does add a layer of complexity. There's a lot of shame there. The partner may not even know that they have engaged in porn at all. So yeah, would just be curious on how
Mm-hmm.
one might approach that.
Yeah. So in partnered relationships, there's two different types of situations. Either the partner that's not using, whether it's a male-male relationship or a male-female relationship, they either know that the person is using it or they don't know that the person is using it.
Sure.
Okay. So those are two different scenarios. Some partners know and it's bothering them, but they're not willing to speak up. Other partners don't know and it's being hidden, right? So it kind of depends upon what the dynamic is of that couple. But let's just say it's a hidden thing. Okay. If it's a hidden thing, then what we have to acknowledge and what we have to realize is that by choosing the pornography, we're not choosing to engage in intimacy with the person that we are choosing to be in a relationship with. Because if that
Mm.
energy is going out to this, then we don't have that energy to actually put into the relationship. And so when you're choosing this, you're basically unchoosing intimacy. And there's reasons why we do that. I mean, when I think about why men watch pornography, every single man is different. That's the one thing that I've learned in this process is that there's no one reason why any man watches it. And there's no one size fits all solution. For some men, they're using porn because they're too afraid to leave the relationship because they know it's not the right one for them. There are other men that are using pornography because they believe that they can't actually get what they want, meaning that they won't use their voice to say, hey, I want to have a different type of connection. And they don't think that their partner will give that to them. There are other type of men that are out there who bid for connection with their partner, but their partner says, no, I'm not in the mood. And so then that's where they go and they feel sorry for themselves and they go into the porn, right? So point is it's very different for each man. But what I would just say is that as we outgrow pornography, we begin to confront the fears that we have of being truly intimate with our partner, where we actually begin to connect at a soul level and begin to come into, power within instead of power over or under dynamics. And we start to
Yeah.
begin the process of having a truly soulful connection. Yeah.
And how do partners typically react? Like when you're working with clients, are you doing kind of couple sessions? I would imagine that for someone who's been hiding this in particular, that this is probably one of the most challenging conversations they've ever had with their partner.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Usually, well, two different things. Sometimes men come to me and say, hey, I have this thing. And then they bring their partner to the calls. And then other times the women reach out to me and say, hey, I just caught my partner having, watching porn. Like I need to leave the relationship, but I want to do a therapeutic process to see if we can save this. So it kind of depends upon
Yeah.
how it ends up happening. But the way I work with couples is a unique process. So what I'll do is I'll have them put their hands on each other, and then I'll do a lot of sentence stems. What I see in your eyes right now is, the thing that I wanted to say last night was, when the thing that I'm still holding back from saying to you, but needs to be said right now is, right? So you do a lot of deep, authentic relating and kind of getting into being vulnerable. And then what I'm looking for is I kind of trigger the system intentionally. I'll give one sentence stem to one man or to the woman, or man, depends upon who's coming to me. And then what I'll say is I'll basically say, when you answer this question, I want you energetically to allow your body to go into the shape that it wants to go. And so sometimes they'll want to go forward, sometimes they'll want to go backwards. And then what I'm looking for is, what does the partner do? Do they also disengage, or do they go forward? Because that's the subtle energetic which is happening beneath the language that is being shared. And then what I'm looking for is where does the person say one thing to their partner, like, hey, honey, yeah, I'll take out the garbage. But in their head, they're going, fuck no, I'm not taking out the garbage. Meaning those are polarized parts. So often within intimacy, they're saying one thing and they're doing another thing. And so then what happens is when we find a polarized, set of parts, then I'll work with just the man or just the woman or just, whoever it is, one of them. And I'll do an IFS session where their partner witnesses and watches the therapeutic process unfold. And often what we're doing is we're going back into the past and we're unburdening the little boy who started watching porn well before, the age of whatever, 12, 10, whatever it was. And in that process, often it's very cathartic. There's a lot of emotion. And then if you're the receiver of that, like let's say you're the partner witnessing your partner do their therapeutic process, it helps you to develop more compassion for why they were watching pornography in the first place.
Yeah.
An example might be a boy who had experienced sexual abuse, but never was willing to share that or, say it out loud. And then that turned into a porn thing. And so then porn is infiltrated. So we go back and we unburden him. And now there's empathy and compassion flowing both ways in the relationship, instead of just this porn thing is just, this big thing in the way, basically. So,
yeah. No, thanks for sharing all that. Yeah. And you mentioned IFS a couple times. I just want to clarify, IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. And you could probably describe it in a very succinct way better than I could. If you want to go ahead and do that, just to make sure that they're clear and on what IFS actually means.
Yeah. So IFS was founded by Dick Schwartz. It's the book No Bad Parts is an incredible book. It's a great companion. But we have different types of parts. Part of me wants to stay out late and have a beer. Part of me wants to go home and get a good night rest, right? So we all have different parts inside of us that have different ways of wanting to move through life. So the main parts in the IFS model is managers. These are like the get shit done parts of us. And then the firefighters, these are often the ones that are the addict parts. So the firefighters are the ones that use the booze or the alcohol or the porn to put out the triggers. So managers try to keep us from getting triggered. Firefighters, once we are triggered, they try to bring us back down. But ultimately, there are no bad parts, meaning that these parts of us are ultimately here to protect what is called the exiles. And the exiles are the little ones in us. These are the young parts of ourselves. And the exiles don't have an agenda. They just want to get and receive love. That's all that they're here to do.
Yeah.
And so inside of this model is what's called self energy. I like to think of it more like soul, but that's ultimately our authentic self. And the better we know our parts and the better we can unblend and unburden them, the more we can be in self energy, and the better we have the capacity to respond to the world without being reactive. So that's kind of the nature of it.
Well put. Cool. So thanks for all that. I wanted to this is more of a curiosity. Like if you were we've talked a lot about like social conditioning and not getting support that we needed as a child, too much, too fast, without enough support. If you were to go back in time and kind of recondition or re-educate yourself on sexuality and porn, let's say this, 12, 10-year-old version of yourself, how would you approach it? Or how would you approach someone approaches sexual education or relating to their own sexuality as a man in today's world? Like what would a conscious sexual education look like from your perspective?
Love this question. And the reason why I love this question, hold on one second. Excuse me. I love this question. And the reason why I love this question is because I'm in the process of launching my business, but on the side, I'm also going to develop a nonprofit. And that nonprofit is literally geared and engaged to tackle that exact problem that you just said, which is how do we have a secular, sex positive form of sexual education for our youth? And how can we gather families together to have this conversation at scale? So the way that I answer this question is that what we have to understand is that pornography, whether we're aware of it or not, it breeds sexual violence. There are statistics out there that look at young kids that watch pornography and the rate of sexual violence and the number of, and I'll link it to you. There's a TEDx where she speaks to this, where basically the amount of sexual violence that's happening with kids that watch pornography is greater than even school bullying. And so when we think about that, we start to say like, okay, well, is it because of the pornography that they're watching, or is it just because of something else? But my take is yes, the pornography is influencing violence, and the things that porn is teaching us to do, we're going to go try that out. And that's what we really have to understand. So what I would do if I were teaching and coaching my younger self is how to look at pornography through a critical lens. How do I critique it? What is really going on here? Is there gender violence? Is there racial violence? Is there actual abuse happening here? Are these people holding eroticized wounds? Are they reenacting those wounds? What are all of these daddy and mommy and stepdaughter and all these things? What are these implying, right? This is an eroticized wound because of trauma. People hold that, so then they're drawn back into certain genres, right? So if we can look and understand at looking at porn through a critical lens, then we're not going to necessarily look at it through an erotic lens. We're going to look through a critical lens, right? And if we do that, we can begin to see what lands for us and what doesn't land for us. So a good example she makes in the TEDx is sort of this point where, let's say a woman, I think she said, was kind of, she had body issues or body image issues. And then she saw in pornography, oh, here's a woman who has a similar body to me, and she is the object of desire and affection from this man. And so that was helpful for her in her process of understanding, oh, I could be desirable, right? So that's one way of seeing how pornography could be helpful for some, but then also potentially not helpful for others. So that critical lens is not taught to our youth, and it needs to be a requirement in order for us to move into a healthier space with our sexuality.
Nice. And that's amazing that you're starting a nonprofit around that. It almost sounds like what needs to happen is there needs to be also more conscious pornography, even in itself, like kind of these, entry points that are a lot healthier than, like you mentioned earlier, like being exposed to bestiality and things you just simply weren't ready for at that age because you were randomly downloading things. And
Yeah.
is there a spectrum of pornography to ease someone in that is free, that is less likely to lead to violence, that doesn't depict violence, that isn't depicting things that maybe someone early on in their sexual journey should not necessarily be seen, but they're still in this exploratory phase. So that's a really interesting and sex positive perspective that I actually haven't heard. Because usually, most of the time, the resolution or the solution is just to pretty much like abstain or to hide or to shame or to withhold. So that's amazing. So kind of to conclude things for today, I'd love to just leave the listeners with some resources, practices that if someone is interested in getting started with sexual transmutation, learning a little bit about inner alchemy, a lot of these amazing practices that you mentioned, like working with the perineum, moving energy through their body and starting to feel themselves like starting to get a different sense of what sensuality can be for a man, where would you recommend that they start? What would be some books or practices to look up, resources of your own, anything that would be helpful for them?
Yeah. So I'm just pulling out here my massage gun because I just want to say that this is the most effective tool that you can own as a man. So I use the Sharper Image brand massage gun. It's got 6 different speeds and a lot of different adjustments. But when you begin the process of moving pornography, out of your system, out of your body, we have to understand that it's not just the psychology of it or the psyche. It's also stored in our tissues because we've hotwired that with our whole orgasm. So as you begin the process of clearing out your nervous system, you can use a massage gun, starting with the bottom of your feet, moving up your legs, and then working into the perineum region and into that root chakra, along with the tailbone, up and down the spine, even over the top of the head, and begin opening up your energetic body. And so as I teach this is one of the aspects that I teach in my men's group, is working with these guns where you're using audible releases or energetic releases. So as I'm massaging, I'm also, right? So I'm kind of moving through my body and my system and seeing where there is stuck energy and learning how to move that energy out of my system. So if you're out there and you're wanting to outgrow pornography, especially, that is a really incredible tool that you can.
So once again, thanks for coming on to today's episode. And for the listeners, everything that we've mentioned today, we've covered a lot of ground, whether it be Taoism, internal family systems, the massage gun, all sorts of stuff. All of that will be in the description or in the show notes, depending on where you're watching this, on YouTube or on a podcast platform like Spotify. So once again, Tyson, thanks a lot. This is a fascinating topic and there's so much more to cover, but feeling really good about our episode today. So have a good one. Thanks everyone for listening.